to Cyber Sidekicks, the weekly cybersecurity podcast hosted by Richmond Advisory Group's principal analysts, namely me, Rory Duncan.
And me, Christina Richmond. This podcast is your go-to partner for understanding the cybersecurity market, industry trends, and the real-world challenges of protecting organizations today. Rory, you have a little bit of a frog in your throat, or is it a cat? What's going on?
No, I was, full disclosure, everybody, I was hoovering earlier on today, and we do have cats, and they are beginning to molt, I think, because they must sense that spring is coming. Not that we see it outside. Anyway, so I was coughing and sneezing at the beginning, so I think
coughing, sneezing, wheezing, but you're not ill. You're okay.
No.
Right.
No. It was just a bit too much housework involving dust and cat hair. Anyway, So how are you today, Christina?
I'm very well. Thank you. It looks like a beautiful day outside.
Nice.
And I'm getting more and more excited about RSA. So I think each week, Rory, we should just do a little pre-RSA chat. And then what do you think? Should we do that now a little bit?
Yeah, let's do that now. And then we can talk about what we're doing this week. So as you know, RSAC 23rd to the 26th of March. Our meeting agenda is already full, so sorry if you're angling to get some time with us. However, always stop us and say hello. We're happy to grab a coffee at some point. Now, this year we're going to be covering the trends, innovations, M&A activity, and so on. And we'll be recording a special podcast and so on. What else will we be doing, Christina?
Yeah, is it really 5 weeks from now? It's getting right on our heels, isn't it? So yeah, we'll be talking about, what's happening on the show floor. We'll be looking at our hot picks, things like that. But the thing I'm most excited about is what we're starting today, Rory. Our guest today is from one of the top 10 finalists of the Innovation Sandbox at RSAC. And that happens on Monday, and it's a coveted spot. It is an exciting presentation every year. And then out of that, there is one winner, and that company gets, I think it's $5 million.
Really?
Wow. I think so. Could I be wrong? I'll have to look that up, folks. But it's a lot of money. But there's also a lot of spotlight on that company. So This week's guest, very excited, is the Chief AI Officer for Geordie.ai. And they are one of the top 10 finalists, and you will hear why in this discussion that we have. I'm so excited to chat with Hannah.
Yeah, great. Me too. And so this will be a special episode, folks. We are anticipating a great discussion with Hannah as a way to kind of preview and highlight some of the really exciting companies that are going to be exhibiting at RSAC this year in the Innovation Sandbox. So no news this week. We'll be going straight into the chat with Hannah. So bear with us, folks. So this week's guest is Hannah Marie Darley, who is the Chief AI Officer at Geordie.ai, who are one of the top 10 finalists in this year's RSAC Innovation Sandbox. Hannah, thanks for joining us, and thanks for joining us at such short notice.
No, of course. I'm very, very happy to be here. It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Great. Well, do you want to say just a few words about what you do? Because we've not met before. We just had a little conversation before the show, and then maybe we can have a chat with you.
Absolutely. So Hannah Darley, I'm the Chief AI Officer and one of the co-founders at Geordie.ai. We are an agentic security and governance platform, which is a mouthful, but basically we think that AI agents are the future of work, and we really want to help businesses to adopt them, but adopt them safely and to manage the risks. So that's what our whole entire product is designed around: understanding your agents deeply, helping to govern them so that you don't have to compromise innovation for safety.
No, you don't really think that agents are the future of work, do you, Hannah? I mean, really, this is news to me, Rory. We haven't heard this before.
Yeah, it's a pretty hot take. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if it was the first time you'd heard it. I'm not even sure how you guys have heard about agents. They haven't been in the news much. They're a closely held secret amongst the tech community.
Yeah, brilliant. It's kind of like the crustacean community. They're coming out of the woodwork, and we're starting to talk about them quite a bit. And that reference, of course, folks, is to the lobster that is the open claw or molt book conversation that we had just before the show. But Hannah, this is great. We are so excited to have you on, and congratulations. We should have some fanfare here. Hooray! Making it to the top 10 finalists is huge.
Thank you. We're very, very proud. Thank you so much.
And you should be, and I'm happy to I'll put in one of my many sound effects that I have. When that
will
be really good. Thank you. That will really help.
that would be fun. No, but in all seriousness, I'm so grateful that you came on, because I think there's a lot that our listeners would love to hear about agentic AI. But I have to start with my softball question. It's how we lead off every conversation, which is, what keeps you up at night, Hannah? Is it the crustaceans? Tell us, please.
Believe it or not, for the rest of the security community, it's not the crustaceans for me. Agentic AI definitely keeps me up at night. It also wakes me up in the morning, and it's with me on my lunch break. So it's definitely present in my life. I think when we think about agents, so many times we are now starting to think about, as we do with all security areas, we start to think about the things that have gone wrong. We start to think about the most recent news headlines where something bad has happened, or where someone did something accidentally which triggered something that no one could have ever foreseen. And now it's, of course, flooding our LinkedIn pages. But actually, agents are really just a huge shift in how businesses can access labor. And so it's a really exciting time. It feels a bit like, I think, what Amazon in the 90s would have felt like. You know, you're on the ground floor of innovation, and you're really seeing a complete change in the way that technology is accessed and the democratization of it. So many people who have never written a line of code in their lives, and happily so, are now able to do something quite advanced. And so that's a really exciting time. But obviously, that also comes with risks. That also comes with a change in where decisions are being made. No longer is it just humans out there making choices, or software that is executing those choices that's already made, but actually it's independent decisions being made by our software. And so that really changes how risk is manifested.
I think that is the scariest sentence I have heard. Well, today for sure, but also in general. But in general, in this time, this era that we're in, that independent decision making, that autonomous action, the thinking, considering, reasoning, or maybe not thinking, reasoning.
Yeah, I would say reasoning.
Yes, thank you. It's, just dealing with folks who are not in tech, calling the bots, as I like to say, or calling AI they, giving them this, they're anthropomorphizing them. I'm always on my guard about that. And so I just did it so innocently, thinking, no, people, it is reasoning. They are not thinking. But it's a terrifying sentence, right? That they're going off independently. What could go wrong? We've talked to folks a lot about NHI, the non-human identity. Right. How do you track them? How do you monitor them? I've read, scholarly articles about, are they actually going to be treated as identities? Will they have rights? Please tell me no. Tell me no to that.
I'm using my crystal ball, and I don't think they'll have the exact same rights. But I do think it's an important distinction to make, because identity is still a yet unsolved problem for human users. And it's a very interesting challenge when you come to AI, because pretty much all of the security community for the last 2 or 3 decades has sort of gone down the path of users are dangerous, users can't be trusted, users are the weak link. And now the opportunity to move responsibility is finally here, away from those users and to a systematic product. Now, the danger is it reflects the humanity of its reasoning structure, which means that it is just as open to making mistakes, and anything that's non-deterministic just means that basically one day it could do something totally normal, and then the next day it could do something completely different, because it's interpreting live what it's being asked to do and how it should go about executing that task. And so I think it's really important, as you said, to not over anthropomorphize AI and to talk about the reasoning rather than thinking, although it's a really cute headline while ChatGPT considers what to do. I think one of the biggest things is large language models look at spatial reasoning. So they're looking at the distance between words. It's like a really, really sexy autocomplete. And so if you're thinking through, then how do I hand off decision-making to an LLM, or how do I hand off decision-making to a really advanced LLM with tools or agent, then what you're saying is I'm letting my request or the task types that I have be interpreted by a system so that, number one, I get more out of it than just what I can think of. And number two, I get more scale. So it happens at machine speed speed. It doesn't just happen at the speed at which I can prompt. And so it really does change quite a lot. Coming back to your point around identity, I think understanding access is always important. I think, you continue to see that in human security, but that's just one piece of it. Another huge piece is understanding behavior. And that is where actually it does cross the threshold from just a system that's executing something that's already been decided into something that's making those decisions for itself. Now, of course, it's different than the multi-level reasoning and thinking that humans do, but it is still making independent decisions. And so the risk is really different from traditional software. Hence why identity management is an important part, but behavioral observability and also governance is critical to keep agents on track whilst also innovating.
So, okay, the multi-level thinking that humans do, I adore that phrase. And so when we think that AI is doing multi-level thinking or processing, not thinking, but processing and reasoning, when we think they're doing it, it's just that they're doing it at scale. They're going through the inputs they have, the data the inputs it has. See, it's so easy to anthropomorphize, right? I'm going to use that word 8 times more because it's so delicious. And I think we do that with AI, right? We constantly make them into this human aspect, the thinking, as you said, with ChatGPT. But I want to go back to the multi-layer thinking, the actual thinking that humans do versus the scale of the reasoning that AI does.
Yeah.
So that was a mouthful. That's really important for us to see as a distinction. Is that accurate, the way I separated those two, do you think?
It is. So my background is in psychology, and I think about this a lot. And when we talk about human reasoning, one of the most important things that happens there is that you're not just reasoning across one specific plane. You're having multiple processes in your brain happen to dissect and categorize, to think about possibilities, to consider ramifications and implications. And all of this is happening in milliseconds. And none of it's happening, for the most part, consciously. You're having thoughts, but you don't know the process by which you're having those thoughts in most cases. So when you think about how that translates through to AI systems, we have dissected down the minimum viable product for those learning types into what you would see now as different AI applications. So machine learning, for example, when you talk about supervised machine learning, most of what you're talking about is classification. You see large gray animal, your brain automatically goes elephant. But for a machine to repeat that, you have to teach it what an elephant looks like. You have to give it specific examples, and then it can categorize in milliseconds from these elephant pictures that it sees. And so when you think about how do you then have multi-layered reasoning like a person would, you have to take out emotion because computers don't have the ability to process emotions. So that's one piece that is always going to be different. But then the second piece is layering those different approaches together. And so essentially different types of machine learning, different types of deep learning, different types of algorithms pulled together into a complex multi-level reasoning system. But that's not what we're talking about when we talk about agents. Most agents in the market today simply have a large language model, so a way to reason, and a tool, so a way to make real-world decisions or take action. And so what we're talking about there with autonomous systems is just that the agent or the AI entity is able to make choices based on either a request or a task brief, like an employee manual you would have, and then execute those decisions without continuous prompting. So that is not the same as a multi-level reasoning system, nor is it entirely the same as an autonomous system. It depends on how autonomous each agent is, because it varies quite a bit, and also what kind of decision-making tools you give it. So what kind of context you give it, what kind of memory it has access to, what kind of knowledge it has access to. And that's why it's so complex, I think, for most people to wrap their hands around what does agentic mean and why is it so different? Because isn't it just the same as an LLM and I can talk to ChatGPT, so isn't that the same as an agent? And the answer is, in most cases, no, but sometimes if you connect a tool to it. I understand why people have a hard time getting their hands around it.
I'm picking up on two things. One is context, which we'll come back to in a minute. I'm sure Christina will probably bring that up because that's a discussion that we've had with a few guests recently, how when we're dealing with identity and non-human identities, such as agents, how context perhaps matters even more. Context relating to risk and what's acceptable. It points to this idea of not just identity, but this behavior, right? It doesn't really matter whether the agent is a human or not. It's about what they do, it's their identity. Does it therefore require, and where do you see this fitting in? We've spent, I don't know how many decades learning about human behavior when it comes to use of IT and systems and then giving them access and identity. It seems as if we're having to learn about agents' behavior in the same way and classify them according to a different system. What kind of behaviors that agents exhibit? Can agents exhibit behavior that we can predict? Do agents have unpredictable behavior? And I'm thinking about when we try to build into our security systems ways of recognizing whether somebody is a bot or a human. And then, you see what I mean? I'm trying to kind of get to a point where, because if you look at what you guys do in terms of your kind of classification and your tracking of agents, you're wanting to know what agents are capable of. And capabilities will not just be what they're written to do, but what they actually do in the wild. What is their behavior?
100%. And I think it makes a lot of sense, actually, why people struggle to not anthropomorphize, because to go back to how our brains categorize, we don't have a category for anything that acts human except for a human. There's no other category for us to put something into. So anytime we see any sort of human traits, so responding like a person would, having tone of voice changes, or having the ability to interrogate their own thoughts or ask questions back, that's something that only people do. And so naturally we ascribe it the rest of human agency or the rest of human characteristics rather than just that one attribute. In terms of behavior and how that changes, we absolutely have to understand and identify agent behaviors on their own. Now, this is somewhat similar to understanding user behavior, except in this case, there's a lot of constructs that wouldn't exist on a human side that exist on the agent side. So one of those examples would be a shared agent. In human terms, this would be multiple personalities. So you essentially have more than one person accessing the same agent. They will have different permissions, which is its own challenge, but they'll also have different requirements. They'll have different needs to know of information, and they'll also have different ways in which they expect the agent to operate. And so if you can imagine how you would model that agent's behavior, it's not just one pattern of behavior that can be unpredictable, which is true of all agents, but it's also different dynamics of personality from the users interacting with the agent and either standardizing or breaking out individual elements of that behavior by transaction or over time. And so when you think about how do I analyze agent behavior, a huge amount of it is understanding what's possible. But I think a bigger amount of it is the focus on how decision-making and tool choice transition into risk. Because when you talk about how do I start to think about this from a security perspective, how do I start to get my head around what is different, it's not just that agents are making decisions, because that is unique. It's how those decisions are impacted by things like context. Context is absolutely key across agents. And so in certain contexts, it will be totally fine that an agent has access to 6 tools and it uses those 6 tools. In other contexts, that will overload the agent's context window, and actually it won't be safe for that agent to have those 6 tools, even if none of those tools are malicious. And so you start to get into really, really granular understandings of not just what's possible for one agent to do, but how do I start to systematize this risk? How do I go beyond very, very granular understanding of prompts or the tools themselves into how this is going to act as a system? How am I going to understand this behavior over time? And that's one of the things that we focus on at Geordie a lot, is an in-depth understanding of agent behavior.
There's something I want to back up to. If you have to be so granular about the context and the behavior of agents with the specific tools in the specific environments that they're working in, with the specific knowledge set that those machines are working in, then how do you govern them?
Yeah,
that's the first question. And then I want to finish up, I think, on that probabilistic question, because I think it's a new concept for a lot of our listeners, and I think we should unpack it just a little bit more. So how does Geordie, or any company for that matter, come to this very complex set of tooling, machining, reasoning capabilities and govern them, set policy and guardrails for them?
Yeah, I think the first thing that I always talk about, I was actually at a meeting with about 60 compliance officers the other week, and I got a similar question. And it was essentially, so what am I supposed to do about this? How am I supposed to govern this challenge? I think the first thing for every organization is to look at your AI policy and look at how general it is. So I'm not even talking about how general it is across applications. I'm talking about how general it is across types of AI. The way that you govern machine learning is completely different to the way that you govern LLMs, to the way that you govern agents.
Correct.
And so when you think about how do I address these practically as a security team, if you're trying to treat it as kind of a one-size-fits-all problem, you're already going to have a huge level of challenge there because everything is going to be so abstract to fit all those unique use cases in that you're never really going to get to a point where you have practical mitigations. The second thing that you need to do from a governance perspective, and this is what we always talk about, is the context is the key to the governance. So you govern through context. You have interventions that are based on specific evaluations of agent scenarios, not just general policies. Because I think one other mistake that we try to make is we overly generalize when it comes to security risks. And we say, oh, well, data exposure, that's the big problem. We just need to stop data exposure. But data exposure is so fine-grained, again, even on the human level, that need to know isn't always the same as access, which is bananas to me when you think about how far we are into digital security. But then when you think about, okay, then how do I start to abstract this out across agents? The only way to govern them is to, again, deeply understand how they're configured, what they're capable of, deeply understand their behavior, and then govern or essentially manage them through that context that they're operating in minute by minute. So you're not just setting a general policy of you will never be able to share data outside of this organization because that's completely unrealistic.
Right.
Instead, what you're saying is the ways in which you share data outside of this organization need to fit these ethics or these acceptable uses. And then inside the actual remediation themselves, going into the specific context of whether or not it makes sense for that agent to do that at that time, to that person, to that system. It's very, very, very macro at the same time as it's micro. And so I think when you think about, okay, how do I do that? So what we do at Geordie, we don't try to look at risk as a general category for agents. We map across frameworks like OWASP Top 10 and EU.ai Act and ISO 42001, but we don't just say high risk systems. We look at the context that they're operating in to determine their risk. And so again, you're making continuous evaluations. You're not painting everything with a broad stroke. And I do think that does somewhat change the risk calculus, to your point, Christina, around how do I go back to how I normally make enterprise risk decisions. Agents don't operate from the same perimeter basis that users do. And so when you think about how do I start to get my hands around this, the first thing you need to understand is you're having digital entities that are going to cross perimeters, have access to various systems and data. And so the question isn't, how do I make everything so airtight that nothing bad ever happens? Because that's how you block innovation. The way that you make it work, the way that you keep safety as a high priority is that you understand exactly what you have, you understand exactly how it's operating, and then you enable either human choices or AI choices to keep that agent behavior on track over time as context changes.
So context is unique to each agent or group of agents. And you're doing this in not necessarily real time, but you're updating it. You've got endpoint agents, cloud platform agents, agents for the various code repositories, so GitHub, GitLab, and so on. You've got all of them like the work. I'm just looking at one of your illustrations here, workflow output. You've got all these different agents with different functions in different places, each of which we should be aware of the context in which each of these ones is operating at any one time. Devil's advocate question, that seems to be a very, very tricky, almost impossible thing to do, surely.
I certainly hope so. I think that's a lot of our IP. So yes, I think that it is a very difficult thing to do, and no one should try. No, I think it's
and we
it's very,
can, and we do
we
it
can
well.
do it. Nobody else can. If you want to know how, come to us. No, it is a very challenging thing to do. I think that the biggest shift in terms of how we actually do it is by moving away from things like benchmark risk. So one of the ways that security teams have right now to evaluate agents is vendor onboarding. They have an assessment of risk. They will base it around use cases. They'll base it around expected tool access, and all of it's entirely static. And so the challenge that security teams are running into is it doesn't fit with that problem, which is that agents change minute to minute, agents choose minute to minute, and the context that worked for one thing yesterday won't necessarily be safe for one thing tomorrow. And so having that immutable log store, having that understanding of behavior, having that ability to govern contextually is the only way that this scales. Otherwise, you have really, really regimented rules for very, very specific examples, and you can only operate those specific examples. It's kind of like, why can't we just make agents more deterministic? Well, the X factor, the thing that makes them the future of labor, the thing that gives you the return on investment is the agency. It's that ability to be externally creative outside of just what someone has already decided they will do, to operate at scale so that I can get more than what I could just get by myself. And I actually think I get this devil's advocate question a lot. It's the same question as, why can't I just put a human in the loop everywhere? Why can't I just make a human make a decision instead of leaving it all to the AI? And my question back to you, and I always ask this and I get the same laugh every time, is, are all of your colleagues equivalent in their ability to read an email and respond? And the short answer is no. So if you imagine, we have kind of a human in the loop savior complex where we imagine that human oversight is naturally A, better than the agent's outcome by itself, and B, equivalent. So we don't always specify who that person should be, what skills they should have, whether or not they need experience looking at this quality assurance task that they're being given. And instead, we kind of default to, well, a human is better than no human, which again, coming back to the beginning of this, is hilarious given the activity around users and the trust around users throughout the security industry. So landing the plane, I would say it's incredibly difficult to get that deep of an understanding of behavior and to have that continuous understanding of context. But that's what you need to scale agents to the whole of the business.
Okay. I suppose I'm trying to get my head around some of the equivalencies for humans, because as current labor is humans primarily, although maybe that'll change in the future, our ability to do what we do also depends on the tasks that we're assigned and the systems we have access to and our behavior. We don't have free agency in the same way potentially as an agent does, but at the same time, even as humans with multi-level, multi-layer thinking, we still don't have open access to everything that we could or should have access to. Just given our experience of the work environment, imagine, in a large corporate where we've all worked, of course, over the years, we have job titles, we have senior and junior levels of authority and authorization and access, kind of like agents do, right? Lower level agents, higher level agents, but it's quite strictly controlled. Applying that to agents, each of who can have potentially multiple different tasks requiring a different context minute by minute, does seem to be an awful lot of work, to use a very cliche term. Am I overthinking this?
No.
Are we looking at agents being uber human in terms of the ability to have access to what they need to have access to kind of in real time relative to the context at which they need to do that task? And certainly it doesn't seem as if humans could do that. Is it because they're agents?
To the first question, are we overthinking this in terms of human access versus agent access? No, I think we're underthinking it because the ways in which people make decisions are in most cases not auditable until there's a real world impact. And so what I mean by that is you have access to your tools as an employee. You only have specific accesses. You only have specific data. You only have specific information. But how you choose to do a task is entirely black box. It lives inside your brain. We don't have a sensor there. We have no idea what you're going to do. All we can see is what you've done. So we can only see how the output of those decisions has come to affect either the systems that you access or the way that you do your job or achieve your job. With agents, you have a slightly layered insight there because with behavioral observability, and to some degree, depending on which agents you're talking about, you might even have explainability. So how do I understand the reasoning that went into that decision? How do I look at the plan for what the agent is going to do? And then the systems access on top of that. Now, the key difference is that humans tend to work single system. So we don't tend to chain tools together or chain context together or data together in the same way that agents do and at the scale that agents do, because again, all this is happening sub-second. So when we think about what the key differences are for behavior and also for how we need to think about governing them, it's not that agents have a completely different paradigm in terms of human work than we do, but I do think there's an important point about generalized agents that would not go amiss here, which is the more context-specific and task-focused an agent is, the better results it's going to have. When you try to abstract out to a general assistant, a co-pilot, we saw in 2023, 2024, you tended to want more specificity on its knowledge, on its ability to execute specific tasks. And then all of a sudden, agents came out, and there was a way to have narrow and deep technology that could execute those specific tasks better. And so it's not the case that they're the same as humans in terms of governance, because we have so many different tasks that we can accomplish ideally equivalently for our employers. But we have the ability to take on so many different knowledge bases and tasks and contexts and still deliver good results. With agents, the more narrowly focused they are, the more you can manage the context around what you are asking them to do, the more improved, the more consistent, even with non-determinism, the results are going to be. Where you tend to see agents go adrift is through complex tasks that require a lot of different context and also require a lot of different systems. But I think we need to slightly separate out what we can measure from human decisions on employee basis and kind of user behavior management and things like that versus what we're able to measure with agents, because we assume that we can measure everything for humans because we have a lot of software around it. But the reality is there's a lot that happens inside the brain that we don't measure. And so we are seeing a difference there in what we can measure from agents' behavior and planning.
Yeah, part of being an analyst is being forever curious and always learning, and neither of us love boredom. And so it's just delightful to have someone like you on, Hannah, who you're so good at explaining very difficult concepts and putting in metaphor that works, also. So thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate you taking the time, especially last minute. And please, please, please come on again. Best of luck as one of the finalists in the Sandbox. We're going to be watching. Can't wait to see what happens.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks,
you.
Hannah. Yeah, okay, thanks again for your time, and I look forward to talking with you again soon.
It was a pleasure.
Wow, that was a fantastic discussion with Hannah. I know we often say that when we have interviewed our guests, and of course, most of them are great to speak with, and they're all great sports for coming on the show, but that was a great discussion with Hannah, don't you think?
I think it was unique, actually. I mean, for so many reasons. She's incredibly articulate and really knows the AI space, but she also has the psychology background, which I found fascinating, that we're applying psychology to identity with agents. That is mind-blowing to me, and it makes sense. So brilliant, brilliant conversation. We'll definitely ask Hannah if she will honor us again with her presence. Next week's guest will be a surprise. We're going to continue this kind of special episode leading up to RSA. Less news, more guests, and we may have one or two guests in the next show. And we're working to have them from the Innovation Sandbox finalist list. So stay tuned for that.
Great. Excellent. Well, thank you, Christina.
Hey folks, we'd love to hear from you. We do get feedback now and again, but please, this is something very important to us that we tailor this to you. So get in touch. Don't hesitate to email me at Christina@richmondadvisorygroup.com, and you can email Rory at richmondadvisorygroup.com. We really, honestly would love to hear from you.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you, and hopefully you can join us again next week for the next show. Bye-bye.
Absolutely. Bye-bye.